Keith Pompey
Who
covers
are
the
you?
76ers, although I believe he's out in Chicago getting a head start on the game tomorrow night. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we look at the Sixers. Down the stretch they come. Keith, how are you, pal?
I'm doing well. What's up, my favorite Mountaineer?
Yeah, man. It's
Oh, my goodness. We're not going to do this.
Yeah. Well, he's a Pitt guy. He likes to bust me.
Oh, okay.
I had a guy the other day who listens to your Locked On podcast, and he says, when are we going to get a Pitt guy and a WVU guy together on the podcast? I said, I'll have to ask if WVU guys are allowed on the Pitt podcast there.
No, we could do it soon. We could do it like next week.
All right.
I mean, let's make it happen.
All right.
Gil just inviting himself on people's podcasts now?
No. My buddy's a big fan of the Locked On podcast. He listens to it all the time.
Mike, do you want to be on a Pitt Guys podcast? Come on, man.
He's a good man.
I'm joking.
Of course he
I'm
does.
joking.
Of course he
I think
wants to be a
Keith's
winner.
probably like, man, I don't know if I want to lose some followers by having Gil on my podcast.
So we got down the stretch they come here, Keith, and it's oddly enough, here's a team that's pretty good, and then whenever they lose one game, it seems like the bleep hits the fan. You know what I mean? I mean, all of a sudden you got people questioning the coach. Is he the right coach? Is this fair or unfair? And you know, I want to look at Brett real quick in terms of they got like 19 games left. They got lineups coming in and out. I mean, do you think he is in a tough spot regardless of what happens to this team this season?
I think not regardless of what happens. I think he'll be in a tough spot if they make an early exit, like, you know, the owner said. I just think that, you know, once you have a bunch of top free agents or top additions, you know, on your team, you know, somebody has to become the fall guy, and it could be Brett Brown. You know what I mean? So I think he's in a tough spot from there. But, you know, it's going to be funny because, like, funny meaning, like, if the Sixers are successful, you know, all the people calling for Brett Brown's head are going to be the same people saying, hey, Pompey, how come you didn't vote him for Coach of the Year? He did a heck of a job. You know what I mean? So it always changes, but the Sixers are funny, man, because, like, when they win, you know, people think they're better than what they are, and then when they lose, it's like the sky is falling, and it will happen 3 times in the same week, you know?
Keith, I bring it up a lot on the show. There's no middle ground. It's like they beat Golden State at Golden State. That win gets them no street cred because they lose to Boston, you know, with 4 different lineups, and it's like, well, you always lose to Boston. And it's like, well, you beat Denver at Denver, you beat Golden State at Golden State. Nobody remembers the good. They only remember the bad.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say about the fans is, you know, when they lost to Golden State, it's not that they lost to Golden State, it's how they lost to Golden State. And I think that's what the fans get a little frustrated over, you know. So, you know what I mean? I give it to them, but that was the way it happened. You know, we weren't talking about guys shooting poorly. We talked about with 10.3 seconds left in the game, what happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But like you said, there is no middle ground.
Yeah, and I mean, I was there Saturday night. Brett was getting questioned about it. You guys asked him about it the next day. I talked to Draymond Green about it, who said he was stunned about the result there. But you're right. 14 of 44 from Tobias, Jimmy Butler, and J.J. Redick. That's a tough way to win.
Exactly. You're exactly right. A tough way. And then let's face it, I mean, that was a quality team. I mean, the thing about the Warriors, whenever they come to town, I'm always saying, okay, they're going to turn it on now. They're going to turn it on now. It just seems like they're so good that they can be on cruise control in the first half and be down by double digits. And you know there's going to be a point that they're going to flip on the switch in the third quarter and come back. You know what I mean? And the thing about it is, like, the Sixers do have the second best starting lineup in the league, but we're talking about, you know, a lineup with 2 All-Stars, talking about the Sixers, and then 2, like, maybe All-Stars in Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, you know, like on the cuffs, right? And then we're talking about a lineup that has 5 legitimate All-Stars. You know what I mean? So that's the difference. And the difference also is that when you look at their bench, you know, Mike Scott is playing well. You know, McConnell is playing well. And, you know, other guys are trying to get a niche. But you look at Golden State's bench, and you're saying you have Andre Iguodala coming off the bench, and you have other guys coming off the bench
Livingston
who start on other teams. So yeah, Livingston. So I mean, that's the difference. I mean, this team, they won back-to-back, NBA titles, 3 out of the last 4 for a reason. They're just that good, and it's just that the Sixers, unfortunately, when they play a team like that, first of all, you got to have Embiid. And secondly, you have to have a lot of things go right for you. And it just happened that they didn't make the shots, and they almost stole a win. But the way that they lost, people are talking about it.
Yeah, I think moving forward, Keith, in the last, I don't know, what do we have, 18 games, 17 games? 19 games. Mm-hmm. When we look at Embiid being up and down and not knowing if he's going to play 100% to 0% of those games, just setting him aside, what can happen, or what do you think can happen with Jimmy Butler over this final stretch to kind of give fans and this team more confidence heading into the playoffs, so that Embiid or not saying he won't be there, but Embiid 100% healthy or not, you can rely more on him as opposed to kind of the inconsistency we've seen?
I think that Jimmy's going to be fine down this stretch. I mean, before I came on, I was listening to you guys talking about other teams, but when you look at the Sixers' remaining 19 games, outside of this game that they have coming up, they play Orlando tonight, they play Chicago tomorrow, and then I believe then Friday is at Houston. Outside of that Houston game, and then you have the 2 games with Milwaukee, and you have the Celtics. Most of those games are very winnable for the Sixers. I mean, they can even steal some of these. I think they could be, steal some of these other games. So I think what we're going to see everyone get back on the bandwagon. We're going to see Jimmy is going to play more of the point guard, which he's doing now, and he's going to get a lot of buckets. So I think that, people are going to be excited about the Sixers going on the playoffs, because when you look at their schedule compared to the Celtics and compared to Indiana's, I mean, it's night and day. And I think that they're going to take advantage of that, and we're going to see Jimmy thrive, and then we're going to see Tobias, and everybody's going to say how great he is. So I think that, all the concerns are going to subside a little bit just because of who they're playing.
You hear that? The guy was listening before he came on and still decided to come on.
Yeah.
that we thank you enough in its own right, Keith. Do you think that there's anything that jumps out as far as concerning? There just seems to be a difference between the Sixers and their point differential as opposed to the other teams in the top 5 squads, and it's nearly 2-point difference when you look at the Sixers kind of just above 3 points, the differential, and then everybody else, the other 4 teams, right at 5, if not higher. And I'm not going to say, Milwaukee 9-1 is any type of barometer, but just looking at a team statistic, that seems to be the most glaring one.
Yeah, but, I really don't get into that too much just because of, maybe at the end of the season when they play when everything is done, then you can, factor it in. But with the NBA right now, it's crazy. Like, there are certain nights where, let's think about it. Look at the Sixers right now. Embiid has missed, the last 5 games? He's going to miss 6. You look at their roster, and Brett Brown says it, and a lot of people say, come on, Brett, I'm tired of hearing it. But this is like their 3rd team. So when you do stuff like that, you have to factor all that in. You know what I mean? And it's like, if you're saying that, they had Jimmy Butler all year, they had Tobias Harris all year, Boban, all these guys were healthy, then I can look at it and say, okay, well, they have a problem. But, when you get a new roster, the stats, they just don't erase it. You still have to deal with the other, you still have to, you have to carry on the things that happened before. So, I don't really get into the analytics things when it comes down to that. And I'm sorry, I know a lot of people are in the analytics like that. But to me is, do you win basketball games? And they're 40-23. They're either number 6 or number 7 in regards to the best record in the league. Now, when you look at Milwaukee has a dynamite team. They have a great coach. You look at Toronto, the same thing. So, these teams are deeper than the 76ers. So, right now, I really just, I don't get into those stats like that, point differential, sorry.
Keith, what is this team's identity moving forward? Because, listen, the Sixers, you just said the last 19 games, I just looked at the schedule, too, before you jumped on. It's very favorable. I think they play the Bulls 3 or 4 times, the Hawks 3 times. They're gonna string together a bunch of wins. But how they're beating these lesser teams is not translating when they play the elite teams, especially the elite teams in the Eastern Conference. I don't see them working on their identity against lesser teams, and I see them winning games in a lot of different ways. I know that's the NBA a lot at times during the regular season, but when you're in this situation that the Sixers are in, I'm just curious to see what you see and what type of team they're going to be when the lights are really on and Game 1 is that night for the NBA playoffs.
Okay, so this is how I think. This is going to be the Sixers' resume for winning in the playoffs, right, against a quality team. I think that what has to happen is early on, Tobias Harris has to come out strong. He has to make a couple shots, and he has to be dominant, kind of sort of like he was against OKC, right? But all the while, you got to also make sure that Embiid gets his touches, right? And then what that does is when Tobias is hot, Embiid gets his touches. What that does is it opens up everything for J.J. Redick. You know what I mean? Because then he'll have Embiid's presence, right? Well, Ben Simmons, to me, I love Ben. He's a great point. Great point guard. He's an all-star, this and that. But it just seems like when Ben Simmons is leading the team in scoring, and he's being aggressive, he's being active, it just seems like, and it's no fault of his, is that the other guys aren't getting their shots off. They're not making the shots. But when he's the leading scorer, and when he had 20 or more points, I think they lost 4 out of their last 5 games like that, or either 5 out of 6 is one of those statistics. Yeah. So I think Ben has to be the distributor. Now, in the fourth quarter, it's all about Embiid and Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has to take over the game. And then that's where they play a 2-man game, and you have 2 shooters on the outside, and Tobias and then J.J. Redick. And if stuff goes wrong, you kick it out to them, and they hit threes. But that has to be their identity. You have to go through Tobias early, which opens up things for J.J. Redick, right? And Embiid continues to get his touches. But in the fourth quarter, it's all about Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid if they want to be successful.
I love that strategy. I just hope it's implemented. Like you mentioned, Tobias's success against OKC, Keith, and in my opinion, they played a style that we're not used to seeing them play in that game. Without Embiid, it's very up-tempo. And Tobias kind of thrives in that environment. Like, he was very successful in L.A. because they had the personnel and the strategy and identity of up and down and that type of basketball. When Embiid's in the game and with the team, it seems like at times it's like my turn, your turn.
Mm-hmm. I agree, but I agree.
That was similar, though.
That
was similar to what happened last year when they had Ersan and Marco. They were just bombing threes away. They were up and down the court shooting threes, but eventually, when push came to shove, somebody turned those threes off, and it made it more difficult. As you get deeper, you just can't keep doing that, right?
Yeah, you can't keep doing that. But in the one thing that I will, this is the one thing, we talk about people come down hard on Brett Brown. But the one thing that the people don't talk about is that, he's implementing more pick and rolls, right? He's trying to give Jimmy the ball now. And he keeps saying to us, look, y'all, it's all about the playoffs. I'm trying things out for the playoffs.
Yep.
I'm just trying things out. So I think he realizes that. And I also think that these guys want to win. And if you notice, he keeps trying to let everyone know and letting Joel know it too. He says, look, I stressed. This is Joel's team. This is Joel's team. So that's kind of like a message for Joe, too, to be like, look, dude, there's going to be certain games that you might not get as many touches as you think you should get. But always know that you're the guy. You're the guy. You know what I mean? And then he's always saying, Jimmy's our closer. Jimmy's our closer. So I think Brett is trying to play, getting in these guys' heads so they know that once the playoffs come, like, hey, you guys got to play together. We have to work this thing out because, we want to go far.
I say a lot on this show that gets the ire of many, Keith, is people overreact to Tuesday night in February, January, way too much. And I've always say, look, on Tuesday night in February when they're playing Memphis, sometimes he's just trying different rotations because he needs to see, can these two guys play together? What about these two? And then people get on him. Well, I don't like your rotations. And I'm thinking to myself, do you not understand that this guy is trying to just find some things out? Like, he doesn't care on Tuesday night in Memphis if they win the game by 18 or by 8. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And then also, let's face it, he had a system that he implemented for 5 years. And now he's trying to switch to something else. Now, again, you know what? I give the fans has a right to say what they want to say.
Absolutely.
And there are certain games that I believe that Brett will come back the next day and say, hey, I messed up. But at the same time, it's hard to judge him off of a regular season game when we'll really find out what all this stuff that he's saying, like, hey, we're building for the playoffs, we're building for the playoffs. We'll find out in the playoffs. Now, if they go out in the first round, it may not look good for Brett Brown.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So is that based on – what do you think the message Josh Harris was trying to send? And then I listened to Elton, on Woj's podcast, and he was saying, he has said a lot of things too, like it's win now, we're trying for it now. And I think people hear that and they overreact. Win now meaning we got to win the NBA championship like this year, and if we don't – I think Brand is more saying – all right, the culture is we want to win now, meaning we want to constantly be in play for championships. But what is Harris's message?
The thing about Josh, like sometimes Josh will say something and you have to be there because sometimes he'll say something and it could go out of context, right? However, though, I do believe that, they don't want to lose in the first round. And when Josh says, hey, look, we went out here and we gave up a lot of assets. I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. We gave up a lot of assets, to get these two guys. Now, these two guys, want to win championships and they want to get paid. They want to get paid. And the thing is, they're going to get paid elsewhere, and there's going to be other teams that are going to come after them. And I feel like, Josh is saying, like, you got to make this work. You have to be productive. You got to go far in the playoffs. And you have to make it work. And that's where the pressure is on Brett Brown. You know what I mean? Like if they lose early in the playoffs in the first round, or get swept in the second round, losing 6, basically that's kind of saying that, look, we did everything we can do to get to the next level and we still went out early. You know what I mean? So There is pressure on Brett Brown in that instance. And I don't think that, the owner has to come out and say that for him to feel the pressure. He knows there's pressure. Because all these guys are on expiring contracts. There's only like 4 or 5 guys on the roster coming back, right? So it's one of those things when they say a win now, it kind of sort of is a win now because, you want this team to go far. You have the money. So guys can say, you know what? We were a step away from winning the championship or a step away from going to the Eastern Conference Finals. Let's bring it all back and do it. You know what I mean? If you go out first, it's like, well, maybe the Lakers look good. You know what I mean? So you don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Brett Brown thing is going to be ongoing, whether it's fair or not. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But for you, Keith, what is one legitimate area that you are able to criticize or an area that you're legitimately concerned about as this team is getting ready to enter the playoffs? Like throw the Brett Brown nonsense out, throw, Simmons' youth and inexperience out. But what's something that you've noticed that maybe is a pattern of concern or weakness for this team?
Well, I think they need to, they got to stop turning the ball over. That's the main thing. I mean, I know they play. I know they play with pace and space and all that, but it just seems like they just turn the ball over at a high rate. And I think that in regards to a concern when you into personnel, you know, I think this team is going to miss Landry Shamet. I know that you had to give him up to get Tobias Harris. I know that. But I think that this team needs a player like that coming off the bench, because you have a lot of gritty guys, gritty guys, and you also have post players like Mike Scott, who is gritty but who can step out and shoot. Jonah Bolden can step out and shoot. But I don't see a guard out there who's coming off the bench who's a consistent three-point shooter. And I think you need that to go far in the playoffs.
Keith Pompey, and he joins us here live in Chicago. The Sixers play tonight against Orlando, tomorrow against the Bulls, Friday night at Houston, and you can hear all those games right here on 97.3 ESPN. And, of course, the conversation on the Sixers, always polarizing. And, Keith, it's kind of you to jump inside this conversation with us. Thanks, pal. I'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks for having me on, fellas.